it is very much based in logic, but there is a connectivity between how we are defining what we're observing, like what is the problem, what are the factors involved in this problem, and what are the factors required to maybe find a solution, what do we have access to, and how well will this fit in this situation. So there definitely is a logic to it, but I think sometimes it can be hard to understand that logic if we don't know all the parts that are involved. That's where the study of Ayurveda is really important, because it's learning context. It's learning all the different components that we're working with so that we can figure those things out a little bit more easily, or at least find the logic behind what we're observing in a person, and what is the potential of these substances to help them with their health.
Hello, it's your friend Veronica, and I want to welcome you back to the How to Take Care of Yourself podcast. If this is your first time joining us, I want to say welcome to the family. I'm so thrilled that you're here. You've picked a really good episode to join us on. And if you're listening to this episode today, here's what I know about you. I know that you think that you're worthwhile enough to take care of. And that's amazing, right? Our whole premise on this podcast is to teach you how to take better care of yourself so that then you can take care of the people around you and you can take care of what's important in your world. You've picked a fabulous episode because today we have Dr. Anusha Sehgal, who is my Ayurvedic teacher and just a wealth of information. She's a classically trained Ayurvedic physician with over 20 years of experience in education, clinical practice, and research. She earned her Bachelor of Ayurvedic Medicine and Surgery degree from the Ayurvedic College in Coimbatore, and she has a Master's in Ayurvedic Pharmaceutics from Rajiv Gandhi University in Bangalore. Currently, Dr. Sehgal serves as the director of Boston Ayurveda Incorporated, where she leads the Advanced Ayurveda Practitioner Training and the Ayurvedic Doctor programs. She also teaches in the Ayurvedic Health Counselor program and guest teaches all over the place. She's an adjunct faculty member at the Kripalu School of Ayurveda, which is where I met her. And previously, she held positions as the editor-in-chief of the Ayurvedic Journal of Health and as the founding chair of the National Ayurvedic Medical Association Certification Board. She's amazing because she actually grew up in a town just outside of Boston, but she's Indian and studied in India. So she's able to bridge the gap between the two in a very unique way. She is absolutely one of a kind, and I can't wait for her to talk to you and for you to meet her. So let's get into it. I'm super excited. Welcome, Anusha, to the How to Take Care of Yourself podcast.
Thank you so much Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
I'm excited too, as you can tell. I've been looking forward to this since before I invited you to come on. So I'm really thrilled. I have already let our listeners and our audience know a little bit about your background and where you come from, but I would love if you would tell us a little bit of your background, a little bit of how you got to be where you are today.
Well, thank you again for having me. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Anusha Sehgal, and I'm a classically trained Ayurvedic physician. My background is, I grew up here in the greater Boston area, or actually just outside of Boston, in the suburbs, and was very interested in studying medicine because I kind of figured out that's kind of what I want to do. But I was not necessarily interested in going down the conventional medicine route, even though Boston is a very good area to do that if that's what you choose. But I was more so looking at other ways to help support people with their health. And my father was like, well, why don't you consider some other options other than conventional medicine? So when I was 15, I went to a lecture at Northeastern, and Dr. David Frawley was talking. And he was talking actually about 5 elements. And for some reason, I don't know why, this topic really struck a note with my 15-year-old brain. And it seemed to completely make sense to me. And I found that very interesting because other things were not as intriguing, but that seemed to be very intriguing. And I think for many people who get into Ayurveda, kind of eventually find that we have some commonality in why we seem to be very driven with this, is that there seems to be a logic that we find, and we tend to love problem solving or love mysteries, and this seems to give us the clues to be able to figure that out. So I think that was definitely me as well. And so since that point till now, it's been really all about Ayurveda. Even at times in my life, I may have kind of swerved a little bit away from it. And it seems like the universe is always pushing me back in this direction. Follow Ayurveda. This is kind of your thing. This is where you belong. This is what you need to do. But it's been not only my profession, but definitely a passion and a hobby, which is why I think most people who get a chance to meet me realize that I really do like this. It's not just something that I wanted to get into as my job, but it's something that I truly enjoy learning about, learning to use this and support people as well as myself with the tools and techniques of Ayurveda, how to support our health.
I like what you said about that being a hobby, but you can't drive by Ayurveda, I think, or at least I can't, and I know you can't. You're either in or you're not, right? It very much kind of sucks you in, even if you're not trying. And I hear that. I know you've heard it from your students, but I definitely hear it from my students where they're like, yeah, I just thought I was going to dabble, and now I'm in the AHC program.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart, but I think what usually tends to drive most of us to keep going with it is that it seems to keep making sense. Like I hear this from clients a lot, in that not only when they come to consult with us about how this sometimes helps to give them an option to make sense of what's going on with their health, but also the fact that it answers so many questions that they had, things that they were feeling that seem to not really be relevant in other conversations and with other healthcare providers. But somehow, we want those details. We want those things. We want to understand what the person is experiencing. And all those details matter. They help us get a better sense of what's going on. And sometimes we can help them understand a bit more about what's going on. So I think that's what, when you get your answers, like you've been searching really long and finally, like, you get the light bulb that goes up, it's very satisfying. And I think that's kind of what a lot of us are looking for. We're looking for those answers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you grew up in, I happen to know it's just outside. I used to live in the same town, so I know exactly where you're talking about. And then you saw this lecture with David Frowley, but then there was no school for Ayurveda for you to go to here.
And this was back in the late 90s. So there were one or two schools in the US, but they were very short programs, like a few months. And it wasn't really getting in depth into the science. Those courses were not available back then. So the only way to really study this was to go to India. So after I graduated high school, I went directly to India, kind of, jumping way into the deep end and trying to figure things out. So I ended up studying in South India, in Coimbatore, which is in Tamil Nadu, and I did not speak the local language. I did not know Sanskrit either. So many of my students who think that I know all these things, I started off just like everybody else, not knowing any of the languages, not knowing how to read this. But I think it was, again, part of the drive and the wanting to know that motivated me to do all of that. Now, when I think back on it, if I had to do it now, I don't think I would be able to. But in that, I think also getting into it at that age made it maybe a little bit easier because I kind of didn't know what I was getting into. So I went to India. I did the BAMS course, which is a bachelor's in Ayurvedic medicine and surgery. And that's 4.5 years of theory and 1 year of residency. And so during that process, really studying just like everyone else who gets into the Ayurveda profession. During the course of that, learning Sanskrit, learning how to read and write. And again, I don't know how I got there, but I got there somehow. But I think it was really nice in the sense that there was a lot of hard work that was put into it. But now that has played a big role in what makes me a little bit more confident. I can't say I'm 100% confident because in order to say that, I would need to say that I know everything, and I know for sure I do not know everything. But at least from what I know so far, that hard work that I put in at that time, definitely it keeps giving back all these years later. And even now, I still have questions, but now I know how to look up and find the answers to those questions. And even if students ask me questions, and if I don't know off the top of my head, then I can go back and look to find the answers for that. So that was, the first level of learning. And then I was also teaching after I graduated in the same college that I studied at. And the first subject I taught was Ayurveda philosophy, of all the things. But it just so happened that, again, always choosing the hardest things. I chose the hardest subject, but I actually really liked that subject. It was a bit of a challenge, just graduating, and I was teaching this to freshmen, people who are now entering into Ayurveda. Just graduated high school, and they were entering into the BMS course. I was teaching them about Ayurveda philosophy. Again, another jumping into the deep end. I like challenges. But that was also a really nice experience in just getting a sense of what it takes for people to get into this subject, but also hopefully getting them to be inspired by it. Because though philosophy may seem like something that's kind of way out there and it doesn't necessarily feel like it's something you're using on a daily basis, but it's interwoven into all of the fundamental concepts of Ayurveda. If we understand that, and if we get a sense of what that means, then as we learn more and more details, you start to see those philosophical concepts are practically applied in everything that we do on a regular basis in Ayurveda. So started teaching more than 20 years ago. Then I got into a bit of research, kind of accidentally fell into some controversial research about Ayurveda and heavy metals. But that was also, in a way, retrospectively very good because it led me to doing my master's in Ayurvedic pharmaceutics and kind of getting into the research of that, trying to answer, again, very difficult questions about the safety and efficacy of our Ayurvedic formulations, and also considering all the different sort of standards that we will find in different countries, different continents around the world. And how we can answer those questions about not just the safety issues, but also efficacy, trying to get into that. So that was a bit of my work in research. Started with my master's, then I came back to the Boston area, did a academic fellowship at BU, and continued more of that journey into research. But with research, even though I know I have the methods and I've been doing that for many years, but I found that Ayurveda research has its place and it can be important. Sometimes people want to see that data, but also it's not the end all be all of, when it comes to understanding alternative systems or how they work. When it comes to somebody who's actually needs to use it, they could care less about the research. They're more so concerned about how this is actually going to help them. So they're not concerned so much about the numbers that you're going to present to them. They more so, is this logical? Does this make sense in their life and what they're experiencing right now? And can this actually help to improve their health? So I found that research has a certain side of it, but also just clinical practice is also really important. Just working with clients, trying to find ways to individualize their care and support them.
I was going to say, because we know that there's no one size fits all in Ayurvedic medicine, it must have been a real singular challenge to then do research around it because of the different components, the different variables that are ever present.
Yeah, that I would say that was one of the biggest questions we had when I first accidentally fell into research. So this was probably in 2004. There was one of the larger sort of first of its kind clinical trials that was going to be done in India, and they were going to compare the Ayurvedic approach to management for rheumatoid arthritis, and then they have multiple groups where they were going to compare this to the homeopathic aspect of treatment and then the modern aspect of treatment. And this was actually being conducted by a institute that does research in Ayurveda. It's completely dedicated to Ayurveda. And it was an NIH-funded study. I was a brand new graduate, brand new researcher at that point, and our job was really to do all the data collection. So myself and many of my colleagues, we were all sitting there, and our job was to interview the potential participants in the study and to basically be able to put them into different groups and then try to match people in groups, right? So you're basically building the base of the study, who gets what. But they all have to, in a sense, be matching. But this was the fundamental question that we had, is how are we able to match people as per Ayurveda, knowing very well that everybody's so unique, because we have so many different criteria that we consider before even figuring out how we would approach, like how would we formulate a management for this person. So for instance, not just matching people based on an age group, but matching people based on their constitution types, matching people based on what is the state of their digestion, what is the state of their doshas, or what is the state of health currently, what are their food patterns. So many factors come into play that actually ends up creating all these other smaller groups. And it was really hard to find people that were matching to then try to test something in this sort of group of people that are somewhat similar. So in research, we definitely find some challenges when doing this with Ayurveda, because the fundamental concept is to look at the individual and not just to assume and group people together, assuming they're all going to have a similar benefit to something that we're testing, because we know it's going to be different, right?
I've done my own looking into these studies because I'm often asked by clients, and even when I've gone to lecture at different institutions, they're like, can you bring some data with you? And I go and I look at these studies, and God forbid they're done by people that don't really know what they're doing too, because I see a lot of that where people go and say I saw research done on Chyawanprash, and they're talking about the efficacy of Chyawanprash for the immune system or something like this. And I'm looking at the study and I'm like, oh, this isn't gonna, there's no way that you're gonna get reliable data in the way that you're doing this study, because you haven't taken into consideration the fundamental variability of the human condition that is so essential to our Ayurvedic practices.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what makes it unique, is that, we have some ideas, and you see a lot of interest being sort of generated now about Ayurveda, about, some of the common herbs that we use, but just sort of cherry picking these ideas and then inserting them into the way that these substances may be understood from a modern perspective does not inherently mean that you're going to get the same thing as how we apply it in Ayurveda. The applied aspect of how we use these herbs is quite different than the modern perspective. And that's includes, so for instance, you see ashwagandha just about everywhere nowadays. And ashwagandha is it's touted for its adaptogenic effects, and it does have many, many therapeutic benefits. However, in Ayurveda, they also talk about the indications and the contraindications, and that has a lot to do with these variables and these individual characteristics to figure out if this is the best possible herb for this person, or does this herb actually have a potential to sometimes create some imbalance or trigger some other underlying issues. So if we're not taking that into consideration, like if we're not applying the Ayurvedic context of assessment and figuring out these variables and seeing if this herb is a good match, and we're just assuming that, oh, well, it's a good herb, so everybody can use it, you'll find that sometimes people are using it sort of over the counter or just because it's good, but they're not always getting the same level of benefit. Some people feel really good with it, and others actually can't take it at all because it simply does not suit their system. So no herbs are bad, no foods, they're not bad, and all of them are good. They all have their benefits, but how you utilize it, the context in which you use it is important. because that's when you're going to see the actual benefit or also its potential to trigger issues or to cause problems. People assume that these don't have side effects. It's technically not a side effect, but it is an effect that you didn't want. So, and that effect happens when it is used out of context or it's used in a situation where it's not a good match, right? I think that you'll see when we study about Ayurveda why it does take a bit of effort, why it does take a bit of nuance is we're not just taking things superficially. We're really trying to understand it in depth so that it is trying to like work through an equation to find if you have this side of an equation, how do you find the other thing that's really going to match to create the balance you want? Otherwise, if we're just kind of picking anything from anywhere and let's see what happens, it's not very scientific. It's not really very precise. And I think as much as sometimes it seems like Ayurveda is not precise, it actually is very precision based, but it does require context and criteria, variables. We have a lot of variables, and we have to consider those variables before picking and choosing things.
Absolutely. As you're so fond of saying, Ayurveda has a logic to it. And if there isn't a logic, then it's not going to work.
Yes. And I wish I came up with that, but that's not I did not create that saying. That saying comes directly from Charaka Samhita, which is one of the oldest texts of Ayurveda. And Charaka Acharya, he's one of the things that he definitely highlighted throughout his text is this concept of logic. And I think that's sometimes what gets lost in Ayurveda as we use it in many different areas. If we take the time to study it and to study it appropriately and to get all of those variables to understand what they mean, understand the variables of even the things we are finding in nature and trying to figure out that matching component. So like, what is the likelihood that this is going to match like 90% or 80% or 70%? So say if we don't get the best option, we can go for the second best option, but we know it's not equal or it's not as equal or as best in matching the situation as, say, the second best that we're using. So we're adjusting our expectations. But can we understand that is actually by using the Ayurveda logic, by understanding what we are trying to assess with the individual, what is their constitution, what is the state of health that is currently happening, and then what can their body withstand. Sometimes you have really great options, but it isn't something that would suit the person, right? Like if they have specific sensitivities or allergies, even though this would be the best thing, it just doesn't work in their body. So we adjust accordingly. So there's where the logic comes in. And I think looking from the outside, if we're not understanding that there are all these criteria that we work through before we come up with a formula or we come up with a management plan before we formulate something, there is a logic as to how it ties it all through. So we first have to kind of convince ourselves, like if I have a question or I have something I'm trying to solve or trying to find an answer, if this is the answer, will this actually work in this situation? It's very much like a math problem. I think people who like math and again problem solving, they do very good in Ayurveda because we like to solve mysteries. We like to figure things out. So if this, we have this option like ashwagandha or something else, we put it into the equation and test it to see, will this actually work? And if we can find a logical conclusion that yes, this would work, then we would go ahead and try to use that. And if we can't convince ourselves that this would actually be useful, then we would opt not to use that and choose something else. It is very much based in logic, but there is a connectivity between how we are defining what we're observing, like what is the problem, what are the factors involved in this problem, and what are the factors required to maybe find a solution, what do we have access to, and how well will this fit in this situation. So there definitely is a logic to it, but I think sometimes it can be hard to understand that logic if we don't know all the parts that are involved. That's where the study of Ayurveda is really important because it's learning context. It's learning all the different components that we're working with so that we can figure those things out a little bit more easily, or at least find the logic behind what we're observing in a person and what is the potential of these substances to help them with their health.
Amazing. Amazing. What a wonderfully succinct explanation of the logical approach that Ayurveda takes. Now, you have kind of made it your mission to teach that approach through classical Ayurveda teaching. You've been doing that for I know you said you've been teaching for 20 years, but here in the US, has it been, the last 15, 18 years?
Yeah. I think because I was there with you with one of your first classes when you were studying Ayurveda. But I think I taught even 2 classes before you. So back, I think, in 2009 was probably the first time I taught in the U.S. And I kind of went back and forth, and there were some gaps in between. But yeah, I think started teaching in the U.S. in 2009. But yes, my mission, it kind of, again, just accidentally happened because I grew up here. And though I'm from an Indian family and have an Indian background, but I did not grow up in India. And so when I went to India to study and getting the opportunity to learn it, in its original form, the way everybody else learns it in India, it was a bit of insight into 2 different worlds. One is the classical Ayurveda approach, and then also knowing our Western background and also our society and things that's just expected over here. So it was a bit of trying to learn. I think everyone kept telling me over the years, like, you have to learn to bridge this gap between this very ancient science and this very Western approach. So I think sort of happenstance, it just sort of played out that way, that it was trying to bring these 2 things together, but also not compromising in what Ayurveda is. We can still apply classical Ayurveda regardless of where we are in the world, because one of our fundamental concepts is everything is made out of 5 elements. And that's not restricted to a particular country. So it means anything on the planet, if it's a physical substance, it's made with 5 elements. And so is our physical body, made out of 5 elements. So that's kind of one of the prerequisites of the variables, right? So that's a basic variable that we know. But then we have to figure out, well, if we're looking at new things, like, say, for instance, plants or vegetables that are not found in the Indian subcontinent, but we're finding it in other parts of the world, how do we then use logic to figure out whether this would be appropriate, how we could use these things therapeutically? So it did take a little bit of extra work to fill in some of those gaps. I still have not filled in all the gaps because I, do not know everything, but it's part of that constant learning process of being open to understanding that obviously these are plants, they're still made of 5 elements. How do we figure out what the properties of these plants are and what are their potentials for being used in a therapeutic manner? But yes, there is, again, applying logic and trying to bridge these 2 worlds together.
Yeah, I like to tell people it's okay if you don't believe in Ayurveda because Ayurveda believes in you.
Exactly. That's a lovely way to put it.
Right? Because I get a lot of people that are like, well, I know it's not Ayurveda, but blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, everything. You can't get around. Everything is Ayurveda because every single thing that's in existence has some ratio of these 5 elements. You can't get around it. Even in quantum physics, it's still all there. It's all existent. And so you've been teaching. You've refined your teaching. You teach at Kripalu. You have your own programs. You have quite a busy schedule. And I also know you've got a beautiful family that you're raising your daughter. You have your husband. How do you take care of yourself with all that you have going on?
Oh, that's a great question. It took many years to refine this approach of how to self-care. And trust me, I am by no way perfect. I still get sick. Trust me, I do get sick. No Ayurvedic professional is immune from ever getting sick. Life will bring disease at some point or the other. So just to put that out there first. But also, and of course, I make mistakes too. Again, by no way am I perfect. I'm just a human. So I do have some good days and then I have some not so good days. But at least for the most part, find ways to manage through the not so good days and get back on track when I need to. So my approach to self-care, obviously based on my prakriti. So I am pitta kapha, which means I'm predominantly pitta. If you haven't been able to figure out by now, I'm a very driven person, and I like a lot of cerebral work because that's just my personality. I'm very drawn to that. And a little bit of sometimes too hyper focused at times of like, I want to solve the problem and I will not stop until I find the answer. Definitely part of my personality and sort of my drive. And I think the kapha part of me comes in to tone all that down because if there isn't the kapha, all of this intensity would be way too much. So I think the kapha has come in to kind of just balance and kind of create a vessel that is allowed to hold all of this intensity. So that based on my constitution, there are certain things that I have to do to manage both of these doshas that are inherently predominant. And then, of course, based on my age, I am now gradually entering into the perimenopausal time. I've noticed some slight changes. So that also has its own like little set of requirements to kind of maintain my health on a regular basis. So for my self-care kind of starts a little bit in the morning. I don't wake up before the sunrise. It really depends on the season, but I do wake up based on when I do feel rested, which usually is somewhere between 6:30 and latest 7:30. I can't sleep past 7:30. But I've done this now, especially with sometimes more some of the perimenopausal symptoms that come in. If I don't sleep enough, I start getting headaches. So one of the ways to manage that is to make sure that I get the opportunity to be fully rested, and that really kind of gets rid of any possibility of the headaches or feeling too fatigued. So somewhere wake up between 6:30, 7:30. Morning routine is pretty simple. I'll get up, I'll brush my teeth, and then I do try to move first. And that's really to manage my kapha, because if I don't do that, my kapha will start to settle in and get kind of a little too dense. So movement, especially for kaphas, for everyone else, you can opt based on what works for you. For me, I find that works really well. And movement is pretty simple because my kapha doesn't like to do things. I have that part of my personality where if you leave me, I would very happily sit in a corner in a chair with a blanket. My daughter calls me Panda, and it's a very, very good description of me. If you just see me sitting quiet, I would be very happy to just sit like a ball and not do anything. or think of things, sit in a corner and think of things. That I would be very happy to do. In order to keep my kapha on the move, I do have to wake up in the morning and move. But the movement that I find seems to be good and not too overwhelming is walking. I love walking. So I have a treadmill because the weather isn't always great outside to allow me to go walking outside. So to keep me on track, that was the reason for getting the treadmill, because I will use every excuse to not move. And knowing that about myself, I was like, let's make sure that that's not an option. So have a treadmill. It's in my garage. Get up at least about a mile. I'll walk in the morning. If not, if time allows, I'll walk more, but at a minimum of a mile in the morning. And then once that gets circulation going, my kapha starts to clear along with that, kind of get a little sweat in there if possible. That usually gives me enough circulation, gets everything really woken up, feels nice and fresh, and not overwhelming in any way. I do not feel fatigued by the walking because, according to Ayurveda, walking is one of the best types of exercise because it's a whole body type of exercise. So I do that. And then after my walk, usually I'll kind of cool down a little bit, maybe for 10 or 15 minutes, just do some stretching and then get into a shower. I have to take a shower in the morning every day. That's another essential for me, partially because it's a cultural thing, but also there is an Ayurvedic perspective to this. It does help to improve metabolism. It helps to ignite your digestive fire. It does help to kind of also cleanse any of the regular everyday sort of secretions that we have when we sleep. Some of the bodily excretions, some of the waste that gets deposited on your skin, on all the different parts of your body. So taking a shower is a whole body way of just getting rid of any of that debris so you feel lighter, feel a bit more energized as well. So that's been a routine since I was a kid, and I can't seem to break that routine. So that's an essential part of my morning routine. Sometimes, depending on the weather, if it's not too dry. In this season, sometimes excess dryness, so then I won't do this. But if I notice that I'm not dry and I feel like I need some extra stimulation, I will do dry brushing before the shower. That's also a common thing, part of my routine. So the dry brushing and upward strokes helps to stimulate, again, skin metabolism. It helps to stimulate, kind of open up the pores. And it is a good way to help to manage if you have any stubborn kapha. And again, I do have kapha that's usually there in the morning. So that's just a way to give a little extra kind of, breaking up of kapha in the morning for me. So by the time I get out of the shower, I'm like really ready to go. Everything feels great. Body feels light. Lots of energy and usually raging hunger at that point. So, all these things also does help to contribute to not just getting your day started, but also kind of without using substances, actually starting by activity and routine, starting to ignite that digestive fire. So by the time I get out of the shower, I'm usually pretty hungry. If not, within 10 minutes, I'll be hungry and then have to go start sort of preparing for breakfast. I know that was a lot of detail about my morning routine.
No, that's great. Our audience really enjoys hearing the details because it helps them to better understand what these different routines, these different habits can look like for an individual. I think it's important to show by example, or at least talk it through, so that when an individual who might have a similar kapha thing going on is like, oh, I never thought about how that walk in the morning could be so useful, or how a little bit of dry brushing could be so useful. So you've talked about pitta, you've talked about kapha. Do you ever have any vata issues that you have to manage?
Yes, definitely. With my teaching routine, usually it's going to be on a weekend, either a 2-day weekend or sometimes a 4-day weekend. And what those usually look like is I'll be talking from 9 in the morning till 6 p.m. with a 1-hour break for lunch and then some smaller breaks in between. But that's a lot of talking. And even though it's not movement in the sense that the whole body is moving, but as we know with vata, one of the types of vata, or the subdoshas of vata, is also responsible for speech. So it does take a lot of effort. And again, if you've ever been in a situation, I think you for sure have, but others as well, if you're talking for that much extended period of time, you will start to see how tiring it can be. And so not only the energy and effort that it takes to teach for so long, but also just the act of talking is definitely aggravating to vata. So usually by the end of the first day, definitely by the end of the second day, I start to see the vata getting a little bit too much, starting to race. So those are the times when I don't have to worry about my kapha and I can eat heavy things. So that's my exception. So those are days when I would probably eat pizza for dinner. And there's a reason why. It's not something I can get away with on a regular basis. Like if I'm not talking, no pizza. But if I am, it's because there's so much of energy and it's actually moving in the upward direction. And it tends to be very overwhelming. It tends to be not grounding. In fact, the opposite of grounding. And so in a way to the attempt to ground that energy so that I could fall asleep, because if I don't, I actually can't sleep. I may fall asleep, but I'll wake up 2 hours later and then I'm wide awake for the rest of the night. So in order to ground that energy and to get into a sense of being able to decompress at the end of the day, I will have something that is more dense or more, sometimes they have similar qualities to kapha, which are the opposite qualities to vata. So something like I may have pizza, which the cheese is what's going to do it for me. That's very heavy. Or I may have something like paneer, which is also a home more softer cheese, or a not fermented cheese, but it's a homemade cheese. So I may have something like that. Or also sometimes I'll have an Indian dish called dal makhani, which is made out of urad dal or black gram, and it has again very similar properties. That is very grounding. And then in the past, just recent few years, I finally opened up to the idea of having goat meat, which was a lot for me to kind of wrap my head around because I did grow up as a vegetarian. And only in the past, 14 years, I now have slowly and gradually gotten into being comfortable in trying different meats. But it's mostly still chicken and goat. That's about it. I'm not very advantageous in trying other things. But the reason I find the goat meat, especially more so the soup, I'm still not so comfortable with the meat part of it once in a while. But the soup, I find like the gravy or basically the bone broth, I find that to be very, very satiating and very grounding to vata. That's something that I can see almost the immediate impact of how that energy just settles down. And I feel so much more relaxed. And then that sleep that I will get that night will be amazing. Like, I don't know when I slept. I don't know how long I've been sleeping for. Like one of those amazing sleeps where you sleep and you wake up and you have no sense of how much time has passed, but you feel great when you wake up. I find that if I have that bone broth, that gives me that kind of sleep, especially when vata is out of control.
Yeah, those sleeps where you wake up and you just feel so satisfied. Like that was a satisfying sleep. I'm curious, on the days that you know you're going to incur a lot of vata, do you still do the dry brushing?
No, that's a great question. No, usually I may do that on the day that I start. Like if I'm starting to teach on Saturday morning, I may do it because I still have some kapha and it's fine. But by the end of Saturday, all that kapha has gotten burnt up or utilized, or with the amount of talking that I've done throughout the day, I'm more likely to have increased some dry qualities or a little bit dehydrated at the end. So the next day, I'm not going to do the dry brushing. That's why I said the dry brushing, it depends on if there isn't any vata provoking activity, and if it's like a regular every day, then yes, I can do the dry brushing. But if it's a vata provoking sort of weekend or there's a lot going on, even if I travel, I won't do the dry brushing then either. It's only like on regular days when I know my kapha is more, and if it's needed, then I'll do the dry brushing.
Thank you for that clarification. I know that part of one of your pet passions is what we call Ayurvedic myth busting. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know, with the advent of social media influencers, we see a lot of weird Ayurveda information out there that doesn't make a lot of logic. And this talk about dry brushing has me think about one that I see a lot and that I get asked about a lot. Would you ever dry brush and then do an Abhyanga oil massage in the same morning?
I don't necessarily need to do that. However, there is context where that would be appropriate. There is a specific context. So, for instance, this is more so not so much for self-care, but more so in a treatment aspect of like management of a condition. And so there isn't a context where if somebody has a lot of vata stuff going on internally, but their skin doesn't look dry, and it's sometimes if they have ama, or if, for instance, they have had issues with like excess weight, and so you can see there's a lot of subcutaneous fat, there's a lot of thickness externally, but internally there's a lot of vata going on. So they do need the oil, but the oil can't get there if you apply it on the skin because there's too much of like subcutaneous fat, there's too much of a layer here that acts as a barrier. So in that context, usually in a hospital setting, or if we're doing like an inpatient or like a panchakarma type of situation, as a prep, they will do not necessarily dry brushing, but the dry powder massage. That's a common way to help to break up some of that excess subcutaneous fat, some of that excess moisture, dry that up, and then open up the pores, open up the channels of circulation so that afterwards you can put the oil on, and then the oil has a place to go so it can get absorbed. But for self-care, I wouldn't say you want to do that on the same day because it doesn't always work the same way. There are actually two opposing type of properties. So if you're doing the dry brushing, it's actually dry brushing is more like lymphatic massage as opposed to abhyanga, which is the opposite, not lymphatic massage at all. Because dry brushing, you go with upward strokes. And so the purpose of that is you're supposed to go against the grain of the hair. Now that's if you have hair on your hands that you can see the direction that the hair is growing. we want to do the strokes in the opposite direction of the hair, which is known as pratilomana. So what that does is, by going against the hair grain, it actually causes stimulation. It's a little bit agitating, right? It disturbs the hair. And by that, vis-a-vis helps to invigorate circulation. It helps to open up the pores. And by being disturbing or invigorating, it actually helps to break up any subcutaneous fat or any moisture, any stagnant moisture, and can allow some of that to excrete or to move out through the skin, to filter out through the pores and actually gets eliminated out via the skin. So the purpose of that is to allow for things to let go, right? And because this is working in the lymphatic direction, it actually does allow for drainage via the lymphatic drainage as well. So the purpose of dry brushing or even dry powder massage, also known as udvartana, that is meant to reduce kapha, meant to invigorate circulation. It's more so to help the body to let go of any excess, right? So in my case, I have a little bit of kapha that's there in the morning because that's the kapha time. So that's why I do this in the morning, to make sure there's an avenue to let go of any extra kapha so it's not sitting around and causing a problem. So just a little bit every day is more than enough. But if someone has that sort of stagnation and they also want the oil, a better approach would be do the dry brushing for maybe 3 days, let some of that extra let go, and then once you've created an opening or a clear passageway, then after that, on the 4th day, then you can put the oil on, and the oil would actually get absorbed better. And there's a better option for metabolism of the oil as well. So maybe not on the same day, but if you do need to create space to then put the oil, you want to do maybe 3 days of the dry brushing first, sort of prep the skin, prep the area, let go of some of the extra, create space. And then on the 4th day, then you put the oil on. Then there's some place for the oil to go. And also the oil is not combating stagnant moisture. There's now, you've created space. You've gotten rid of that moisture. So the oil actually gets a chance to be metabolized via our skin metabolism, can break down better, can get absorbed better, and actually will be able to give you much more benefit than if you combine them on the same day.
Excellent clarification, Dr. Anusha. That's so helpful because unfortunately what I see a lot of, especially on Instagram and those kind of platforms, is that someone will be talking through their daily routine and it's always this very thin, vata-looking individual that's doing a dry brush and then immediately doing the oil massage. And I keep thinking like the sum effect is either going to be at best 0 and at worst it's going to be causing some kind of problem. Right? So you just gave such a beautiful explanation of how to do that. And I think it's important to note for those folks that are listening, if your digestion isn't good, you have no business doing oil massage. So if you have digestive issues going on or you have clinical symptoms that you're not sure about, definitely get in touch with an Ayurvedic professional before you dive into the world of Abhyanga or oil massage, because that often can cause more problems. And that's what we want to avoid. Dry brushing is generally well tolerated, like Dr. Anusha said, with folks that have excess kapha, excess stagnation. Typically, it's more appropriate in the kapha season, so late winter, spring. I don't know if I would do it on a day like today, where when I woke up, it was -15. And I think the dew point was something like -20, which means there was literally 0 moisture anywhere to be had. Thank God for humidifiers. And I don't have any kapha, so I when I woke up this morning, dry brushing was the least of my concerns. But I think the way you explained it there was so helpful for our audience to understand the utility behind the actions that we do, the logic behind the actions that we do.
Yeah, we have a running joke in our house because I live with 2 vatas and I'm so different than the 2 of them. And so whenever my daughter, just last night, we were having this sort of discussion/argument because I was trying to put some homemade cream that I made for both of them. And nowadays, like you said, it's been very dry and cold. So I find myself also using the cream because even my skin is getting dry. So that tells you how much dryness there is. So yesterday I was like, I saw my daughter scratching her leg because it was again too dry. So I was like, why don't you bring the cream? Let me apply that for you. And so my husband's like, oh, well, you need to put this every day, maybe twice a day. And she's like, well, mommy doesn't put it. Why do I need to put it? He's like, well, because you're different and you need that. And she's like, but why do you keep behaving like we're two completely different species? We're not different people. We're same human beings. I'm like, yes, you're right. We are human beings, but you have a completely different body type than I do. So you can't compare what I do and what you do and expect that you need the same thing. You have specific needs and things that you can eat and get away with, and certain things that I can't eat the way you do. Like, these two can completely get away with the fried foods. And it's because they have so much of vata. And also they have pretty good digestion too, that they can eat that, they can burn through it, and they can use all that extra oil from the fried foods, and their body's like, yay, oil. Me, I can't even look at it. Like, and worse yet, if I have to cook the fried foods, sometimes they ask me, it's a very rare occasion. But even if I cook it, I'm like, just being around the fried, I don't even feel like eating. I'm like, no, I'm already saturated with enough moisture of just standing near this. I don't need to eat this either. So it's so different. And it's like, my daughter's now starting to understand that there are different body types. But it's funny that this is a constant conversation in our house, because my husband knows that he and her, they both need specific things that I don't need. And I have specific things that I need that they absolutely could never even like look at a dry brush. It is completely inappropriate for them. So when she compares, we're like, no, we are different. We do have some different needs. It's okay to be different, but we're telling you to do this because this is going to help you. I don't have dry skin, so I don't need that right now. If I get dry skin and where it's dry, that's the only place I would be able to apply the cream, but it's not like a whole body sort of thing. I mean, even for me to do abhyanga, it would really depend if I even need to do abhyanga. But I would need a lot of vata to get there, to be able to do that. Otherwise, on a regular basis, my body doesn't need that. So I don't do abhyanga on a daily basis.
No, even me with all my vata, even in this vata environment, I'm like maybe 2 times a week, maybe 3 is all I really need. And if I go past that, then I feel it. Like, you can kind of, it's like you feel a little slimy, like I'm not digesting it, right? So important to be able to be with that deep knowing of feeling into the body. And it sounds like your daughter is starting to tap into that knowing, which I know she's come a long way.
Yeah, I think it's nice for us to like, these are great examples of context, right? And logic. So there are many things that we learn about Ayurveda, and you will unfortunately find lots of information online about many things that are Ayurvedic. But I would say the biggest way to test to see if something works for you is go based on how your body feels, because your body is it's extremely intelligent. And it usually does tell you what it wants and what it doesn't. It's really for us to be quiet and present enough to listen and observe what our body is communicating. But you can, like you said, you can do the abhyanga, and there are days when you do it and you feel really great. And then if you do it too much, then your body's like, I'm not feeling this today. This is a bit too much. And that's how you know that the abhyanga has done its job. Your body has taken what it needs, and it doesn't need anymore. So more does not equal better, right? You don't need to do more to get more. Sometimes that can also cause issues. So find that balance, and how to find the balance is just follow your body's lead. It will tell you what it wants. And if you keep going and it's too much, it'll also tell you when it doesn't want it anymore, right? And I think that is the logic that's there in Ayurveda. It can explain the same idea. Even if we are not recognizing what our body needs, we can, with an Ayurveda professional, they can help you figure that out. That, yeah, your body's basically saying it doesn't really need this right now, right? And so that's the nuance of some of those recommendations. It is generalized, but there is context even within those general recommendations of like our daily routines or even food. We have context even within that.
Yeah, we do. Speaking of general recommendations, I'm wondering if you could give the audience, so if you had someone who was like, gosh, I don't even know where to start with all of this, what would be some general daily routine, daily habit recommendations that someone could get started with?
I would say one of the biggest things that I keep coming across, especially at this time during the year, obviously is surrounding about food. And one of my favorite things to say is just eat the food. But how do you know when to eat the food? Eat the food when you're hungry. So the trend I've been seeing with my clients since the beginning of the year has been this ongoing issue with like people do sometimes have good hunger, but it's not always convenient for them to eat when they're hungry. So they just wait and then they're like, oh, well, I'll have a break in an hour and then I'll eat. But by the time that hour comes around and then they have their break time, they're not hungry anymore. And their body's usually not in a great place to receive that food or properly digest that food. But what happened when they did have the hunger, it was present and you did not feed that hunger at that time. And that can cause you to feel really uncomfortable. It can cause, sort of that hypoglycemic type of symptoms where you get a little jittery. It can sometimes cause headaches. It can definitely cause you to have your energy tank pretty quickly as well. So I would say one of the simplest things is to kind of, again, follow your body's lead. And if you are hungry, please find a way to eat. Eat whatever it is. It doesn't matter. We're not going to be specific. We're not going to be too hard on you. Even whatever you have to eat that you have access to eat when you're hungry. I think that's one of the most simple requirements that the body has, because food is one of the first pillars of life, and how the body's telling you that it needs food is via hunger. So knowing that, especially if you know that you tend to get hungry at a certain time during the day, it's good for you to at least think preemptively and bring something with you. And again, we're not judging what you eat. As long as you feed that hunger when it's there, eat anything and everything that you can according to what that hunger needs or when it is demanding for you to eat, for you to supply it with nutrition. So follow your hunger patterns. When your body is saying it needs food, please give it that food as soon as possible. Even if, say, it's not time to eat a meal, you can't sit down and eat a meal. If you have a fruit, you can eat a fruit until you actually get to eat the meal. But it is important to put something in. So because that hunger itself is very precious, we don't want to lose that. That is one of the key factors that helps in maintaining your health and also everything else, maintaining your whole system. So when you have hunger, please eat. When you're hungry, do not be afraid of the food. That food is very essential, and that food sustains you. That food gives you life. So we don't want to be afraid of the food. We're not judging about the food. When you're hungry, please just eat the food. So that would be, I think, one of my most common advice that I give people, but it's important. Please eat the food.
Eat the food. And I would say try to make sure it's real food, not like weird Franken food that's filled with weird stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe don't eat a salad.
yeah, definitely don't eat a salad when you're hungry. Not a good idea. If you don't have anything else, like if there's nothing else to eat, then you can eat the salad. But immediately after, as soon as you get some food, eat the food too.
Really good advice, Anusha. Anything else that listeners should?
I would say the other thing is routine. I would say, especially when it comes to maintaining your health, whatever practices we put into place, and that, again, I'm not being specific about what your practice may be. Because those practices we would recommend different for different people. But whatever your practice, say, for instance, whether it's your exercise routine or your food consumption routine or your sleep routine, or even like if you're doing meditation, if you're doing yoga, whatever your routine may be, whatever your practice is, you want to try to do that in a similar practice or the similar routine on a daily basis. The reason why is that we are creatures of habit, and our body really responds to things that are predictable. So one of the basic criteria of how you are able to maintain your health or how you can shift your health is by creating a routine. And the more you have this repetitive pattern, if you make things predictable, your body starts behaving in the same way. It'll start to also become predictable. So it will follow the pattern that you create. And that's the beauty of routine. So if you think about back in the day, people didn't have to know Ayurveda to practice Ayurveda, just as Veronica was saying. This is something that's there inherently in all of us. And we all have this logic that is sort of inbuilt. We do know Ayurveda without even thinking that it is Ayurveda. So think about back in the days when, like we think about 2 or 3 generations ago. If you asked, like your grandparents, well, what did you eat for breakfast? Oh, well, we ate oatmeal every day. Or like this was, we had a hot breakfast every day. And it was kind of always the same thing, or maybe 2 or 3 varieties that was in rotation, but always the same thing at the same time every single day. What did you have for dinner? Oh, well, Monday was this and Tuesday was this and Wednesday. And it was in rotation, same time, like clockwork every single day. But if you notice that their health and their quality of health, quality of life, was really well sustained because of routine and because of predictability. So they weren't eating khichdi every day. They were not eating spices every day. They were eating according to what was local to them, what was accessible, and what they were familiar with. But what did really contribute a lot to their routine, their health, was the fact that it was so predictable, that the body also behaved in the exact manner, the way you have trained it. You've created this environment where it knows when to expect breakfast. It knows when to expect lunch. It knows when to expect dinner. Hunger will show up at those exact same times. It knows when you're going to go to bed, and it knows when you're going to wake up. So it also follows that pattern. Every now and then you're going to have an off day where you get sick or something happens or you travel. But it very quickly, if you put yourself back into the routine, it will fall right back into that routine again. So one of the good things that we can create, sort of the investment in our health, is to create a routine that is predictable. And that may be whichever way you formulate or you create the routine that works for you. But if you come back and do the same thing every single day, your body will respond to those practices in a much more in-depth manner. Like even say, for instance, if you're doing yoga, if you can only manage like a 10-minute yoga routine, that's okay. That's what you can do. But you do that for 10 minutes, the same time every day, that same 10 minutes is going to have a deeper impact on your system than if you do yoga like, for a whole hour, but once a week. Or if it's like, well, it depends. Like today I feel like going to yoga, tomorrow, I don't know. I don't know when I'll go back. You're not going to get the same benefit. But even however small the practice is, putting it in at the same time every day and creating that routine allows the body to start building off of that practice that is predictable, that it knows what to expect at that time. So really simple. And that's actually one of the benefits of really thinking about Ayurveda and its logic. You don't need very fancy things. You need simple things that are consistent. And those simple things tend to be even more impactful than the big fancy, complicated practices that may be out there. Sometimes it's too much. And again, more does not equal better. Keep it simple. And you find that the body can very easily adapt and it can very easily fall back into a predictable behavior, a predictable manner.
Wow, that's really excellent advice. Eat real food and keep a routine. And honestly, I'm with you. If people just broke it down to those simple things, everything in their whole sphere would be better. They like to focus on the shiny, brand new stuff as if it's going to change their life. But unfortunately, the reality is that they need to really go back to basics.
Yeah. It's something that I was thinking about when you asked me about like my self-care. And I think that's the biggest part of, it's not fancy. I mean, I eat khichdi sometimes. I don't, it's again, not really perfect in any sense of what we do. But what it is it is simple. There's not a whole bunch of things, like it's not a very big routine. wake up, brush your teeth, move, and go take a shower. That's it. And after that, I have like a little meditation / breathing practice that I do. For the most part, if things happen and I can't do it, I'll skip it. But it's that, and then the food is pretty simple. It's like you know this about me. I'm a very lazy cook. You like to say efficient. I like to say lazy, in the sense that I need to cook something that I can finish within 30 minutes. If it takes more than 30 minutes, I am not interested in doing that because I have to cook and wash dishes and clean up. So I need to be able to do all of that in 30 minutes. Anything beyond that is too much for me. So in that, whatever I can cook, that simple dishes tend to be easy within 30 minutes. Cook something simple that we can eat for lunch or probably dinner, or if I make it at dinner time, it becomes the next day's lunch. And it's something that is homemade. It is leftovers, but less than 24 hours. And it's simple homemade food. So that gives us also the possibility, like days when I don't want to cook, or nobody wants to cook, that we can eat out. And that's okay. We have our splurge days. We can eat other things. And even if it's kind of somewhat unhealthy, it's okay. Our body has some bandwidth to handle some unhealthy things too. But for the most part, it goes back to simple, right? It's nothing fancy, nothing like, overly sexy. It's just plain simple foods. But what happens is, again, it's a predictability. Your body's like, okay, I had this like really amazing weekend where I ate all the things and I did all the things. But then on Monday, you go back to, the simple foods. You're like, okay, so I got something I can reset with this, or I can go back to my usual pattern, my usual routine. So keep it simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. I think sometimes with the fact that we have so many options to choose from, and we have so much of variability, that in that we expect that we're supposed to be having all these things. And at the end of the day, your body just really needs some very simple things in order for it to sustain itself and in order for it to actually keep up. The more simple it is, the more predictable the body will become. The more complicated things are, the more the body has to process, the body and the mind. And it can become overwhelming, right? So if you're not sure, keep it simple. And I think that's a great place to start with being able to build healthy practices.
Right, because that simplicity then makes it easier to be consistent.
Exactly.
And that's a huge part of making things work, right? That predictability equals consistency. You have to be consistent with these practices because your body needs to know when and what is going to happen. And, we do talk about the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you do the best you can, and 20% of the time you're going to go eat whatever you want, or go to the birthday party, or, go horseback ride, whatever it is. But then you're always, come Monday morning, like you were saying, you're back into the predictability. You're back into those consistent habits that help to move the needle back towards more ideal health.
Right. And the good news about it is the body can handle that, right? If you're doing things, or again, life happens and things that we are not prepared for, or that doesn't fit into our routine, we have to do things, right? If that happens as well, you have the bandwidth to allow for things that are unexpected, or things that are out there, or any of the splurges that may be there. But then you bring it back to the routine and it's familiar. And so the body will go right back to the familiar. It just needs you to put it back in place and it'll go right back there. So that's the benefit of consistency, is that it's sort of an automatic reset button, right? And we don't have to just reset once or twice during the year. If we have this sort of ongoing simplicity and predictability, anytime you go back to that, the body automatically goes back to that pattern that it recognizes and that it knows very well. And the other benefit of simplicity and the routine is there is a cumulative effect with that, right? The more you're doing it, sometimes we start off and like the first couple of days feel really hard. And then you're doing it for like 2 weeks. And you're like, is this working? I'm not sure if this is working. Like, I don't really see anything. It is working, but it's working through trying to create more consistency with your health. And eventually, sort of very slowly, when you look back, you're like, oh, I do feel a little bit better. My energy is better. I find that, I can do things or I can last throughout the day and I'm not like reaching for coffee or I'm not reaching for these things to keep me going. My sleep is better. I'm noticing that I'm not getting foggy brain or I'm not having these other challenges. And so it happens very slowly in the background. So even if you're putting in this effort, don't think that it's not working. That's also a common thing. Sometimes people get really fatigued with Ayurveda because they want it to see the results immediately. Even if you're doing the simple things, doesn't mean that it's not working. It is working, but it's doing it very slowly in the background. And it is having a cumulative effect. And in retrospect, when you like get, a couple months down the line or a year down the line and you look back, you're like, oh yeah, things have changed, but it did change at a slow and steady pace so that it's not so obvious until you actually try to look back and see what the changes are. But what you will notice is that they were sustainable changes, and those are things that your body didn't have a drastic reaction to sudden change. It changed and it's able to maintain those changes. So it, again, even though it's simple, doesn't mean it's not potent, doesn't mean that it's not effective. And also, even if you can't see the results, like they're not obvious immediately, doesn't mean that there's no benefit from what you're doing. So keep up with the routine, keep going. If you have off days, that's okay. Give yourself a pause. Go ahead and have your off day, do what you need to do. And when you can, come back to it. And when you come back to it, again, it'll continue with that cumulative effect. But it's also the investment. Sometimes we get caught up with the fact that it takes a lot of effort to like keep thinking about what I'm going to eat, what I'm going to do, like why do I have to do all these things? But it is an investment in not only how you feel now, but also how you feel in the long run, right? So again, go back to our older generations. Sometimes people, the generation after them, so didn't want to be like their parents. They decided to do everything opposite than their parents. But why were their parents having such, they may have had health issues, but they also had a very long life and they did have very good quality of life, especially even towards the end of life. Like their senses were still working. They were still very much within good cognitive health. They could still have physical activity and keep up with it. The body could withstand more even towards the end of life. So just like we are able to think about like saving for retirement, think of it in that context. You're investing in your health so that there's longevity in your health, right? So though these things seem like boring and like, why do I have to eat the simple food every day? Or why do I have to cook every day? Yes, there is some effort you're putting in there, but what you're doing is not only how you feel today, but also how it contributes to your health in the long run. There's an investment that you're getting there too.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Putting money in the health bank, putting health in the health bank for later on. And that consistent, simple, right? We don't want, it strikes me that nothing happens suddenly in nature that isn't sort of catastrophic. When we really look at it, it's like everything happens over time. If a tree just suddenly burst into existence in your yard that, went from seed to fully grown, that would be very shocking and detrimental potentially to the environment around and maybe even you if you weren't expecting it, or the animals that are around, right? I can just imagine that being a bad thing. And the same thing is with your body. It's like, we get all these people that, especially around this time of year, that want to lose all the weight right now, want to lose it yesterday.
Yeah.
And they sometimes employ things that end up then being extremely deleterious and have ramifications that aren't seen for years after what they've done. And often when we get to these people later, they say that they wish they hadn't done it, whatever it was, and wish that they had taken the slow, steady approach so that it was sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that goes for all different aspects of health. We want these things to be sustainable. And the truth is those sustainable habits are the simple, maybe not so easy because consistency can be hard, but the simple ones that, so is it exciting to go to bed at 8:00 at night? No. But does that make me well rested so that I can be a better person the next day? Yes. And so you do it every day. Otherwise, right, like you were saying, like you need to get all the rest for the perimenopausal body, or even before that, you just needed rest. Otherwise, you get cranky and headachy, and nobody wants a grumpy panda.
No, and I'm a very, very grumpy panda. Like all the things that for those of you who know me or have ever met me, you would not ever believe that I can be a very grumpy person. But have you ever seen a panda or bears when you poke them and they get angry and they're very vicious? I can be that too. So the antidote to that is just let me sleep, and I will sleep and I'll wake up. I try not to ever oversleep because that's not good for my kapha either. But sleep until my body's fully rested and is ready to wake up. And then I'm ready to do the things I need to do without being completely grumpy and ready to bite everybody's head off. So that's the antidote. Just let me sleep. It might be an extra like 5 minutes, or some days an extra 20 minutes. But I try to give myself enough of that time. And again, yes, no, I've had so many people, so many clients tell me I'm more creative in the nighttime, so I need to sleep later. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard this. And they're like, but people are individual, and this is just my thing. And I was like, yes, I completely get that. However, in the context of your creativity and what sort of habit of sleeping later, think about everything else that your body has to adjust with in order to allow that to happen. And what you're getting from, are you technically actually creative at that time? And is it worth everything else that your body has to sacrifice to allow for you to be awake at that time and then wake up the next day and still have to do all the things you have to do? And more so, it's more an idea that they're creative at that time than so much of it actually working out. Because I had someone say this to me. He's like, oh, I create things and I do things, and so I have to sleep. I only go to sleep by like 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning because yes. But then also the problem was also issues with getting things done. So I'm like, but aren't you staying awake to get things done? So it was like, just going back to ask, is it actually working? And so, our dear friend Mona always says, how is that working for you? And it's more so an idea in our mind that we're going to be creative at that time than it actually working out. If you even just shifted that quietness and that time to focus, if you shifted that to early morning hours, you'll notice that you actually are more creative and you've already rested and your senses are nice and happy, and you will actually be able to be much more creative from 4 to 6 than from like 12 to 3 a.m. So it's the ideas. I think we get very attached to some of our practices, even if we know very well that it's not working for us. But we're so used to it that it's more so the act of letting it go and trying something new that is harder for us to mentally accept that than so much physically accept that. Physically, our body will follow whatever we put into place. But it's our mind that but I really want to stay awake because that's cool. Like the cool people stay awake at night. Nobody goes to sleep at 8 p.m. Like that's ridiculous.
And having been the cool kid that stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning, I am here to tell you that I am much better off going to bed at 8 o'clock. Now, the lights might not go out till 9, but if I'm up past 9, nothing good. I'm like a gremlin, right? Like nothing good happens.
Yeah, exactly. We need to redefine coolness. Like we have to have Ayurveda Cool. We're like, Ayurveda Cool is going to bed at 9 p.m. That's Ayurveda Cool.
You may have just branded something totally new for the world. I love it.
Yes, introducing Ayurveda Cool from January 2025 onwards.
You heard it here first, folks. We're on the cutting edge. So, Anusha, we have a tradition here at the How to Take Care of Yourself podcast where we ask a final question, and it's the same question every time. And it's the same question even for repeat guests. And that is, what are you learning from the food that you're eating?
Oh, that is a good question. I would say one thing I learned recently is about like different types of rice. And so we tried a new brand of rice, and it was like it had all the labels. It seemed like it was good quality rice, but it didn't seem to digest well. Like my body didn't like it very well. And it was the same type of rice, but it was a different brand. And then when we switched back to the other brand, I was like, oh, now this is okay again. So what it really told me was to just listen to my body. And and sometimes it's hard for us to gauge like quality of food, like you were mentioning, eat real food. So eating like whole grains and whole food, but sometimes, what labels we have, sometimes it represents something and sometimes it doesn't. So what I think I learned in that process was just trust what your body is telling you. Because it was very clear every time I ate the new rice, it didn't digest well and I kind of felt off and everything would get delayed. And as soon as we switched back to the brand of rice or the quality of rice we're used to, everything just switched right back again. And it was back to clockwork, back to like, good digestion, good hunger. It fell right back into this usual routine. So I think that it was important for me to recognize my body's telling me what it wants and what works and what doesn't. So I think that's the most recent lesson that I've learned with the food. We mostly eat like home cooked food. Every now and then we're gonna eat junky food too. Like I said, I'm not perfect. I eat junky food. It's maybe once a week, not always junky food once a week. But if we're like outside, and this is the give and take we have to do. If we travel, we're gonna end up eating what we have to eat. Because yes, there is the quality of food, but hunger supersedes everything else. If I'm hungry, I'm gonna eat something. And it's either gonna be food or somebody's head or somebody's hand, or I don't know, maybe the car seat, but I got to eat something. So it's better if there is food, even if it's junky, I'm going to eat it because my hunger, that's the pitta in me. The hunger demands. It doesn't just ask, it demands. And you have to eat, and I'm not functional unless I feed that hunger and everything calms down. So every now and then we will eat the junky food, but for the most part, when we're at home, we're eating home cooked food. We can't travel or go anywhere too far away from a kitchen where we can cook our own food. Because if my husband eats food from outside for like 2 days in a row, the first thing I'm going to get, where's my rice? Where's my food? You're not giving me real food. Where's my rice? So I have to basically walk with some rice somewhere or make sure that there's some way to get some real food. Otherwise, I think no one in our family is capable of existing without real food.
Oh, that's hilarious. I can just see him being like, okay.
Where's my rice? I want some idli.
Yeah, right. Italy all day, all night. I know. It's so funny. Well, Dr. Anusha, thank you so much for being with us and imparting some of your wisdom. I already can't wait for the next time we have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And this was so much fun, and look forward to speaking to you all again sometime soon.
Woohoo. Can't wait. Thanks again, Anusha. We'll talk to you soon. Bye. So that was today's episode. What did you learn from Dr. Anusha? Drop it in the comments below or shoot me an email at veronica@veronicawolff-casey.com. I'm so glad you joined us today. And it would do me a huge favor if you would hit subscribe, hit like and subscribe wherever you listen, wherever you're watching, however you stumbled upon this, even if we've never met before. It really helps me out because it tells me not only that you like the content, but that you're willing to hang in there with us, right? That you really are someone who wants to take care of themselves. And that'll also tell the algorithm that my content's worthwhile for other people, which helps this podcast grow. And what happens if this podcast grows? Well, I can bring on more guests. We can dive deeper into the issues that you care about and that you really want to hear about. Okay? In case no one has told you yet today, I love you and I'm convinced of your capacity to continue crafting a life worth living. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.